This is not going to be the traditional security presentation. Wait, one moment. I need the clicker. So I am also trying to make this a little bit interactive so the people here can also get involved. So I have a little bit question answered. So my question to you is, how many of you have ever gotten angry with your computer? Yes. Okay. Everybody? Okay. How many of you felt ever lost regarding what the computer is doing right now? 1, 2, 3. Why is it working? What's happening? No? Okay.
It was the beginning of our show today.
Yeah. So, and my last question, who has ever gotten to the point with their computer that they got so angry that they shut it off or went out to rather grab a coffee or close the laptop because they were so angry with it? 1, 2. Okay, only my colleagues said that they have, but whatever. Okay, so my question is, in those situations when you don't really understand what's happening or you get angry with your computer or whatever, what are the typical ways to deal with this? What is the typical error handling that you would do? I'm thinking about really simple stuff like restart. What would you do? Just shout, yes.
Fire debugger.
Yeah, fire debugger. Debugger, yes. Task manager, antivirus, if you're afraid that you caught something. Yes. So the problem here is that all this situation that I've just described, how are you going to do this when your whole house is one information system? When your kitchen stops working? Are you going to get angry at your fridge? Or are you going to debug your fridge, debug your house, or get angry and go for a walk around the block? So the traditional means of dealing with problems in your computer system, they don't really work that way with an IoT system. So when we are planning for dealing with the traditional steps of security that we have to think of absolutely new ways. So the traditional steps are like prevention, detection, and response. And this is not just for security, but basically for all kinds of problems with computer systems. And if we say that the traditional means to this are not going to work, where are we going to get an inspiration for new methods? And just one idea, let's look how humans in their everyday life deal with these steps. How do they stay in control of their life, of their interactions, of their environment? So regarding prevention, what do people do? We avoid risky situations. If someone comes to us and he looks strange, we ignore them or we go away. So how do you do detection? If you feel that you're losing control, let's say you're in a foreign town, sitting in a taxi, and you're not sure what's happening, you start to be very careful. You observe very carefully what's happening. Sometimes you even open your phone and start tracking yourself on GPS, looking whether you're actually getting closer to your destination or something. And in the case that you see, okay, someone is fooling us, or fooling me, then comes the response, which may be quite different. Someone will simply punch the driver, but you may also simply say, okay, let's stop here, and you leave, and you never go to that taxi company again. So these are the traditional ways how humans stay in control of their life. But there are still situations when you cannot be in control. Life is just too complex to be always in control of everything. So what you can do then is to start acting. So let's look at Alice when she got into Wonderland, where she certainly lost control. She started talking in riddles. I don't know who I am. I changed myself a couple of times. And if you think about it, that's also what you usually do. I suppose there are a few people here who are on Facebook, but there is a general pressure, so to say, that you have to be on Facebook. So also, people who are a little bit more anxious go into Facebook, but then they say, okay, I'm not going to actually reveal everything about myself. And that's also true for iCloud, for Google, whatever. So you're starting to act pseudonyms for services. But it's also what you do in your social interactions. You have a different persona in your family, in your company, at university, at a presentation. I'm not mostly this talking guy. So I'm also acting a persona here. So in those situations when we lose complete control, there's another behavior that humans rely on, and that's trust. Now, in computer science, there are quite a few different things that we call trust. So let's clarify here. So we can talk about trust, a human trusting a device. So do I trust my computer to enter my PIN number on it? So for example, Timur doesn't want to log in on my computer because it doesn't trust the hardware. But it's also true for IoT with sensor measurements. Do you trust that those measurements are correct? Sometimes you just simply look at the thermostat and say, that can't be true. So what you do in those situations is you try to check up on what the system is doing. The way to achieve trust between a human and device is mostly about user interfaces, mostly about getting more information about what's happening. But this also works the other way around. The computer trusts in the person who is using it. So, for example, Windows is checking, is this person capable of understanding what's going to happen when they install the software? So they have to authenticate them to be administrators, because if he's the administrator, he knows what he's doing with his own system. And it's also true for an ATM machine. It checks whether the person at the ATM machine is to be trusted to withdraw cash. That's also an interpretation of trust, but it's mostly realized via authentication. We can also talk about one device trusting another device. And this was this whole movement of trusted computing and checking system integrity via cryptographic hashes and so on. It didn't really work out, but there are also other places where one entity or one system trusts another system. Simply, let's say, the TLS protocol, where you see who the other party is via certificates and so on. And finally, a very interesting and new phenomena is when you have to trust a remote system. So the example from previously, do I trust Facebook, what they're going to do with my data? I have no direct interaction with Facebook. They're quite far away. So I have to make a remote assessment about how they are going to behave. But a simpler case is also when we look at peer-to-peer file sharing, that you have to assess whether the data that you are going to download, whether it's valid or not. So, as I said, humans tend to stay in control, and if they cannot, they have to rely on trust. So the more trust we have, the less we rely on control. And the interesting thing on this picture is that by default, we don't require complete control. So rather, in the case when we start distrusting someone, is that we require complete attention and complete control about what's happening. And the simple question is, why? And the simple answer to this is because all of us live in a system. There is a legislative system around us that's going to protect the banal everyday interactions where someone might try to fool us. So I'm going to trust that the bus driver who sits in the bus is really a bus driver, and if he's not, then probably he's going to get into a lot of trouble when someone finds out. And the same is true for virtual interactions. This whole new data protection law from the Commission will try to serve that point, that when you start using an online service, then you can be sure as a user that when you are sharing data, that data will be protected by the company, and if it's not, then legislation is going to penalize that company with quite severe costs. So the other point to look at is how can you achieve with your system that users are going to trust the system, so that users are going to give up some of the control, so they are going to allow that system into their homes. And one point which has been also mentioned by Sean is that the customers have to be assured what's going to happen with their data. And there are multiple ways, technologically speaking, how to provide this assurance. This can be simply by terms of service, which are not going to be read, so you can be quite sure they're going to be accepted. But that's one way to state to the customer what you're going to do with their data, and if they agree to this, then you are also obliged to hold your ground on what you have said. More advanced, but also quite difficult to implement method is to use pseudonyms. saying that you collect user data, but you're not going to pair that with some personally identifiable data. But then again, the question arises, if you have all the data about the customer, his behavior, you just don't have the name, whether then you actually revealed the persona or whether you didn't. And finally, you can realize completely anonymous systems. There are all kinds of methods already available from cryptography and other areas which will allow you to realize the complete security chain and data processing chain via only anonymous data. And another way to realize trust in your system is by involving the users, and you can involve them in multiple phases. You can involve them during the design, which is user-centered design, human-computer interaction. There are quite a lot of areas which deal with this, and what basically they want to achieve is that the system acts accordingly how the person waits that it's going to behave. So that the user interface, the interaction mechanisms are going to fit exactly the customer who is going to use that system, and is going to completely understand what's about to happen. But you can also talk about user involvement when you're talking about security. And this is one very important part, and this is going to be even more important with IoT, that security can be made understandable, and security doesn't have to be something where we consider the users to be the weakest link. The users have to be considered as an elemental part of the security, and they can be looked as such. And there's a lot of studies and a lot of research also proving this point, that customers and users are very capable of making decisions with appropriate weight. So my final statement, and the final statement for today's evening, is that don't make IoT into a rabbit hole. Don't make IoT into a leap of faith. Create a trust between your IoT system and the customer so that IoT really can provide a fruitful or beneficial solution, and it's not going to be the nightmare of all the security engineers as we are going to, or we are presenting it at the moment. That's it. Thank you very much.